Good afternoon. I think that all of you or most of you have already uh, listened to my talk in the morning. And I will show you the same slide that I've presented before. That as I said in the morning, for part of us Brazilian, we start saying primeiramente fora Temer. First of all, fora Temer. Temer is the new president of Brazil. I say an illegitimate president as a result of a farce of a coup d'etat performed by the parliament in Brazil. The situation in Brazil is very difficult now. It's a very sad situation. And I know quite well that it's not the purpose of this conference to discuss politics, and particularly the politics of Brazil. However, I'll say that we cannot discuss IoT and discuss the topic of this panel without involving politics. Just for you, and the name of this panel is Promises and Myth of IoT in a Global Perspective. So in Brazil, with the new government, 52% of the budget devoted to the public internet has been cut. The budget for the public universities is being drastically cut. This means that if nothing is done, in the near future, there will be no internet in Brazil. So it is without purpose to discuss Internet of Things in Brazil. There is Internet of Things in Brazil within this perspective is a myth. It will not happen. This is important not only as a political statement. It's important to fix or to define a context of discussion. For many people, the situation in Brazil is good. In what sense? Brazil is for sale. The price is very low. Our patrimony, our assets are being sold for a bargain. So for the suppliers, for the international suppliers, for the turn-on solutions, this may be very good. It won't matter if it's good for the society, but many people will make money. So this is a context, and from some perspective, this is good. I would say it's not good for Brazil, but it's good for the international financial capital. And you can go there and make business. I think that's obvious that I don't agree with this. In the morning, in my talk, when I presented the comprehensive IT conceptual model, I said that the novelty is to start the model from the society. And from the society to identify the needs. And from the needs you can generate specifications. But a people that has no education is incapable to identify their own needs. So for me, the challenge is education and dissemination. Education not only from the point of view of teaching people to read and to write, but to think. To read the newspaper and be able to criticize, to know that what's written there by the big press is a lie. To understand that their lives are not good. And when they can think about their lives, they can say, I have a need, a real one. So for me, this is the challenge for IoT in a global perspective. And without education, without dissemination, IoT is a myth. That's all.
Amazons, I'm sorry that you will make me. I don't agree with him. I am as Brazilian as him for more time than him, that I am older. And it's not as bad as he said, in my opinion. And I will not touch on this anymore. I just want you to know that there are other opinions that don't agree with this. I don't want to debate, but you are insisting. I will be shown. This is made by the Brazilian Development Bank, that is a federal organism that has very good people working. And my point in terms of what is a myth or what is not a myth is they are trying to study what to do in Internet of Things. And one of the problems that I see in what has been done is the thinking of Brazil is we always are saying that we should not do silos and that should be something integrated. And all the studies, I don't know in the other countries, is it a myth that we, because what we are doing there is that they are always talking about the verticals. The horizontals are the things that are common, and the verticals might be the silos. This is my question. If this is a myth that it's possible not to work by silos, because you see, they made a call for proposals for the big international consulting companies to help them to define a long-term plan. Long-term for IoT is 5 years. Long-term for IoT. And my question, is this real right to try to define which verticals we should face and develop in Brazil? Or if this is right, then it's a myth what we talk about to break the silos. And basically here, they say about how they would like to have the study balancing between supply and demand. And again, it's the same question. We are using the same patterns. Is IoT disruptive and we should do something different or not? And we still have conditions to talk with them. We have good relations with them to discuss. And basically, what they are planning is to have 3, in the maximum 5 verticals, and some horizontals, where this should be the focus of Brazilian government to try to develop. And my point is, in terms of what, is this the right approach? Are not we going to have the same thing? How is here, how is in the other countries?
As if it's something that there is a demand for right now. Is it really something that's demanded by the consumers out here? Do these people actually demand it, or is it something the industry is trying to push towards them?
I would say that there is a demand. In Brazil, we have some systems without government support in these terms, without planning. I believe that I said this in the retail, in the cattle creation. There is a lot of entrepreneurs that they have their business and they are using some of these technology solutions that we call IoT to improve their business and to make a better business. Then there is this demand. Our preoccupation is that they are doing this without taking care of interoperability or whatever. But there is a lot of money going into solutions, mainly in retail and the cattle creation.
Okay, do we have any other questions at this point? No, in which case I shall pass over to John.
So, the notion of the Internet of Things, myth or benefit or future, never know which fables are known in which countries. But I would classify the Internet of Things as both and all of the above. In the proverb I would give you, you have elephants in this country. I went and saw them a couple days ago. Quite cool. The Internet of Things is an elephant. It's both a reality, it's also a myth. And the proverb, for those that don't know it, is there were 3 blind men. You could have more. I think the Internet of Things has more. But the 3 blind men were given the elephant to describe. And the first blind man took hold of the tail and felt the tail and said, well, it's a snake. And it's definitely a snake. I can feel that it's a snake. It moves back and forth. It's a snake. And the second blind man was given the side of the elephant, and he says, it's a big wall. And kind of rough, and in the case of the Asian elephants, they're kind of hairy, by the way, but it's hairy. And the third one felt the front, the trunk, and said, well, it's a great big fire hose that can spray water, and they do spray water. I saw that. And you could extend it to other observers looking at the tusks or the ears or the legs, because they're all kind of different. The Internet of Things is that way. It's hence the name Things. It's many, many things. Most of the presenters so far today have done a pretty good job of saying, well, there's kind of 3 or 4 big areas of the Internet of Things. And some of them right at the moment are very much like the elephant. They're described one way, and there may be promises yet to be kept. I have an Apple Watch. It does some cool things, won't kid you, but there's an awful lot of things that I think it could do or should do that doesn't right now. It's telling me it has no Siri connection. I turned things off, so it's not happy with me. It's a promise. It's something that's not being fulfilled. It's a little bit of a myth. Not to mention they're not cheap. At the same time, I'm aware of a variety of Internet of Things projects, largely in some of the industrial side companies and in some areas such as governments who have maybe more money than the rest of us to spend, that are seeing fulfillment and things realized and improvements. I think one of the speakers today showed things kind of just a few years back right at the technological curve hype. So that's why I say I think there are some myths in the Internet of Things. I think there's some promises. There's some things being realized. Now, for you sitting in the room and Malaysians and people at this conference, what should you be thinking about? Well, for me, I think you need to be aware of the Internet of Things. I've heard it observed that the Internet of Things still needs the first big killer app. The iPhone kind of was the killer app for the smartphone world. There'd been a few things around, but all of a sudden people started buying it, and now it's probably most of the people in the room have some kind of smartphone in their pocket. So we have yet to see that on the Internet of Things, so it's kind of a myth on the consumer side. It's starting, but I've fooled with a lot of the things. There's a lot of myths there. But as I said, I've seen things, particularly in some of the government areas, where the devices are connected, they're being used to improve traffic, they're being used to improve power consumption, things like that. So there's some realities. There's a dark side to those realities, by the way. But so I think we will see in the future the Internet of Things evolving in ways that probably none of us in this panel or the room can think of. But and maybe the biggest myth is that it's going to be 70 billion or 200 billion devices. Those numbers stagger me. But then I wouldn't have guessed 35 years ago when I was writing my first programs for profit that everybody sitting in this room would have a supercomputer in their pocket either. So obviously my prediction powers aren't very good.
Thank you. Are there any questions for John?
Talking about the limitation in terms of the internet in terms of Brazil, just because currently I didn't join the first session of IoT, just to clear things up. When we talk about IoT, let's say, is it still considered IoT if it's being deployed in one local area? Even though it's not being connected worldwide, but it's one small area.
Kind of like
sensors.
a local area network.
Yeah, yes.
I would say in a small scale, it kind of is. Certainly the grander picture is that at some point you would hook into the larger network.
Unless it's being called network of technology, right?
Right. Well, and a lot of companies, in fact, Google, I think it was Facebook, I'm sorry, it was Facebook, just lost a satellite. Rocket blew up in the U.S. And so you have these private companies now trying to deploy satellites to enable remote locations like Brazil, like Africa, maybe some places in Malaysia, to take those things that might be small scale local things, and with the right piece of equipment, hook it into the bigger system. I think those things will continue to evolve. So again, the connectivity of the world is changing rapidly. Has been. Some people ask, why is the Internet of Things now getting talked about so much? Well, for me, it's part of the elephant story. Aspects of the Internet of Things have been around forever. I'm an embedded software person. Sensors and those kinds of things, we've been doing that for years and years. But a bunch of technologies, I think several presenters observed this, are now coming together. And are some of them still maturing? Sure. But now we can have smart devices, phones, connected to the internet, and the internet connected to IoT devices, which have their own set of smart sensors. Not too many years back, you couldn't hardly do those things. And so a lot of these things are coming together with things like big data and the large computing networks to store all your information. There, that's a scary thought, by the way.
That's a good question, thank you. If I can just maybe pick up on something which several of you have said before we move to Ina. We'll come to you in a minute, Ina. Jose is saying the government is cutting investment in internet, is going to be pushing down the development of IoT in Brazil.
A lot of governments are cutting.
A lot of governments are cutting, including in the UK. But equally, we have a lot of big, very rich companies. And I think you talk about Apple. I mean, yes, Apple. Where is the success of IoT going to come? Does it depend on the government doing something? And if the government doesn't do something, is that the end of it? Or is that then an opportunity for business? Well, it would give a different type of IoT, I expect, but...
What I see is a lot of the big companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, IBM, I can keep going, and automotive companies, and almost every large company, to some extent, has some attempts to get into IoT. Now, whether they do it successful or not remains to be seen, but certainly they're doing that. There's teaming arrangements forming up on all those. So I think you see some of that going on. And for those of you that aren't using IoT or aren't working testing IoT, I think in the next few years you'll probably see opportunities for that. So that's a good thing for you all to keep in mind. Come to conferences like this, get exposed to it, be ready for it when it comes. Because several people have observed it's a system problem and it's a hardware problem. And if you're just a pure software tester, you may need to develop some new skills. At the same time, anybody in the room that's of a mind, there's a lot of entrepreneurs trying to start these things up. Will there be the next Google or the next Facebook that's an IoT company? I would speculate yes. How these things are all going to play out, I don't know, because if I knew that, I'd be a much richer man and in the stock market. So again, I'm just a software tester.
So, I mean, can I just pass that to Jose and ask, what is the role of the private sector in Brazil? Are they rising to the challenge, or?
I think that the answer for your question depends on the perspective that you have concerning public services. This is, for me, the key point. You may have public services that are developed by private companies, or they can be deployed by the government. There are 2 points of view. In my view, the public service, maybe not all of them, should be a priority of the government. And for example, for the deployment of infrastructure, for the definition of priorities, in the meeting that we had yesterday, when Ina mentioned that mobility is important, I agree with her. I think that it should be a priority to look at the problem of urban mobility. And urban mobility is a very good example of a cross-domain application. So if you don't have the government involved in this definition of the priorities of what is good for the society, the private companies may jump in, but for sure they have different objectives. The objective of a private company is to make money and not necessarily to provide a public service or to provide a public service with the quality that the society needs and deserves to. So this is really more a philosophical and political discussion. How do you think that public services should be deployed in a country? And maybe the answers are different for different countries. I favor, mainly for lower income countries as Brazil, that the government has a big responsibility in this play. And it shouldn't be left only for the private companies.
Okay, thank you for that. Have any comment? No. In which case...
Actually, I'll add one thing. I spend a lot of money on my cell phone. And some of you probably don't know, but when I was a younger person, the phone systems were all regulated and very cheap. And then they made them private, and they were supposed to be cheaper. I now spend 20 times what I used to spend.
Right, before we started on this, Ina took me to one side and said, look, I've been talking in the morning, I've been talking in the afternoon. Please put me on last. So you're on last.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. But now I realize it's hardest to add something to it, but I try. So promises and myths. I just thought, well, the promise is everything gets better. The myth is everything gets better. Of course, the question is, what should become better? And that is back to the question, is there a need? I'm rather pragmatic in this. I remember the saying that back in the 19th century, when people were asked how an automobile should look like, they most often said, well, it should be a wagon, I think, with 4 horses. Back then, they rather had 2 horses. So they just incrementally increased the features of what they knew. And so turning it back, it's hard to reason about things we yet do not know. So I, for myself, put IoT rather as a vision. So there is a clear need for communication, otherwise smartphones wouldn't have made it. And I strongly believe there's also a strong need in information, and that there are quite some interesting scenarios to improve the information about our world, our society, about small things, about big things. So I'm a believer in that. I also think along the Gartner cycle, we are still rather in excitement phase or over-excitement phase. So there gonna be some disillusion about IoT, and then later on we're gonna mature and gonna have the real solutions along this IoT vision. And back to the elephant story, I feel like being blind woman and that. No. That wasn't my point. So I just said I belong to those blind people about IoT. So I thought maybe I give you an impression what we do in order to limit our blindness on IoT. So along the social impact, we were asked by the Ministry of Urban Infrastructure to think about the gigabit society, and along that we argue about the needs in different application domains. The Research Ministry initiated a call for research proposals on the Internet Institute. There are, I think in UK there's an Internet Institute. I think in US there's also one, several initiative which put at top priority the social science, the political science, and the legal sciences. And we are just technical researchers or engineering researchers, ICT researchers. I call us the junior partners in this setting. So we will see if we manage. There's still 5 German consortia trying to receive that Internet Institute. But the central ideas, at least in our consortium, is that really those social scientists should analyze the social impacts of the ICT or IoT technologies that we have. So turn it around. A lot is driven by the technicians, which Sarah said, I said, is wrong. And we need really to come from the societal perspective. Then I spoke about the technical impact, where we try to foster quality engineering of IoT, because I believe quite some are in critical infrastructures. And we're going to start this month, so the IoT test lab, where we partner with larger OEM, Audi, which tries to understand the impact on IoT in their cars and backbone infrastructures, and car to roadside, car to car, whatever. So there are different perspectives on that for a manufacturer, of course. And we do have Relayer, which is a startup which is both in Germany and America. They do comparable things to the Arduino platform. They have, some extendable sensor platform, but more important is they have a data exchange platform via which they can connect their sensors and actuators and then improve building environments, for example. And well, last but not least, the research impact. In addition to this Internet Institute, we established in Berlin a collaboration of all 4 Fraunhofer institutes. So we are an ICT networking institute. We have a microelectronics institute, one which is on optical networking and one which is on industrial automation. All 4 together try to better understand digitized networking, and then with industrial partners contribute to projects on medical, on medical technologies or medical solutions, smart grids, smart cities, and industrial urban industries. And at my institute, we do have a transfer center on IoT where we try to disseminate and exploit our technical results, which come basically from the industrial automation. Germany is very strong in that, this OPC-UA, and from telecommunication, because that's our strong footprint at the institute, where we do have first implementations on how it could look like from the technical perspective. Yeah, so we try, so to say, to put puzzle pieces together, and hopefully also within collaboration internationally with Malaysia, we can, so to say, further shape it. Right? So, but we always try to combine the societal perspective with the technical ones, and that is, well, I think a good guidance on what we develop and what we do not develop. As there are risks related, data security, privacy, I talked about that before.
Okay, are there any quick comments?
In some way, returning to your question, sorry, I am slow today. I think that the companies have to invest and they have to, but they need the government to establish standards. If not, like I said yesterday about the problem of the electricity. If you don't make a standard, it's 220 or 110, it's 50 or it's 60 hertz, you will have a mess and you will spend more. Then, what I'm saying when I say that the government should be doing things is working in the area where he has to work. And the cooperation, the international cooperation should be basically in this area and in the applications that could be common. Because you see, Malaysia always will have, I believe, some applications that are very typical for here. Brazil, we will have things that, but these standards, it's important. When the electricity started 100 years ago or more now, in some point the government, they made the decision to create a standard. I don't know exactly how it was, but it was made. In some countries it took longer, in others was made before. But even in the United States, in the beginning, they had DC and AC transmission. In Brazil, we still have. DC is our major transmission line is DC from the largest power plant in the south hemisphere in Brazil. The transmission is made DC. Because it was a better solution for long distance. Then you see, always you may have exceptions, you may have things, but it's necessary to have a standard, to have some commitment to some things, so the entrepreneurs can make their investments.
Thank you. I mean, actually, you're not answering my last question, you're answering my next question, which I'll come to in a moment. Before I ask my final question, are there any questions from the floor? Who's got the microphone? Oh, it's coming to you, don't worry. They're running. Could you please just introduce yourself so we...
My name is Lukman. Okay, I just want to know from some of the take from the panel, maybe this is going to be some kind of a redundant question, but IoT right now, is it more like an accessory that people wish to have and dream to have rather than a need? And at what point can it change from something, an accessory to what are the factors that we can change from accessory to something needed?
So I'll take a stab at that. I think it depends upon, it was talked about vertical and horizontal markets and products and things like that. I think it's going to be a little bit dependent upon which one of those things you're on, whether it will be perceived as a need or something else. My suspicion with a lot of IoT is the word ubiquitous comes to mind. I think a lot of IoT will be done and people won't even be aware that they're using Internet of Things enabled devices and things like that. Certainly in some of the cities and some of the industrial settings, and even maybe some of the personal use settings. I think it'll just be something that's a nice addition, and people won't even be aware because there will be minimal or very simple user interfaces. On other devices, like my watch here, I think they'll have to get to the point where there's that killer app. So I think it's going to kind of depend upon what the thing is that's connected to the internet, and I'm not sure there's going to be one answer to that, other than if it doesn't work, people are not going to be happy. And that's where you all as testers are going to come in. You're going to have to figure out some new and innovative ways of testing these things, different from the standard PC computer programs and information systems. It's going to be a challenge on some of these things. You know, this thing has all kinds of sensors and connections. It was mentioned all kinds of communication protocols. You're going to face some challenges. If you solve them, the products will be cool. People will want them or will use them and not know that it's Internet of Things. If not, people are very unforgiving very quickly.
To this consideration from the personal view, I would like to add, well, of course, need is a very strong word. And if you come up with needs, I start immediately think about societal needs. And then I, well, think, yes, of course, is a clear need to make the world more sustainable. It's clear that we have limited resources. You can argue about energy, you can argue about climate change, you can argue about pollution, CO2 footprint, and if you continue that line, we know that we have a lot of inefficiencies in urban infrastructures, we have a lot of loss in energy, in water, in whatever, and if you want to improve those situations, you need to start to monitor. You need to have a lot more near real-time information about what's going on throughout the world. And there is, as of today, I think already a very clear need that we need to improve.
After John and Nina, I don't have much to add. I agree with them. I would say you don't need IoT. You never need IoT because IoT is just a tool to solve problems. Your needs are different. So just to have you an very update example, I'm here, I'm a foreigner, I'm a tourist. So yesterday I was walking around in Kuala Lumpur, and Kuala Lumpur has a very nice bus system that it's for free. It has 4 lines. And I was in downtown and I wanted to go back to my hotel. So I had to take the purple line and then change to the green line. And I have an iPad. Using the iPad, I downloaded the map. I looked at the map. And then I had Google Maps. Because the change from the purple line to the green line is not on the same bus stop. You need to go to another bus stop. And I had 2 different information. The map from the Go KL said that I should go right away and turn right. And Google Maps told me that I should go left. My problem was just to go back to the hotel. I don't want to know if it's solved by IoT or a piece of paper. What I'm saying is not a joke. As a citizen, you need to identify your real needs. IoT is not your real need. IoT is a tool. It may be an adequate tool to solve your problem, or not. So we should not focus on IoT specifically. We should focus on IoT as a tool and use it when it is adequate.
I will try to give one example, maybe two. There is a foundation in Brazil that is using IoT technology enabled to try to solve the problem of the insects that create problems for the harvest, that decrease the production. And this might be some solution that could be good for Brazil and for Malaysia, because what is the difference between Brazil and Germany or a good part of the United States? They have strong winters, and during the winter the plagues are killed. Yeah, but problem here is the same like in Brazil. We have 2 or 3 harvests per year, and from one to the other, when you make the harvest, then you go to plant. The mosquitoes, the plagues, they are there. And if you don't kill them, they will kill your plantation. And they are using technologies like this to discover where they are and act in time. This is an application that I think that is what the country needs. And that independent if we call it IoT the solution or not, the country needs. The other example is one example from IBM. IBM bought the weather company. They have 2 million, I will call sensor, but probably it's not all sensor, but they have 2 million of points where they collect information about the weather. And they have farms in the United States, and they are trying to sell, where they sell information about you are going to have rain in this time. Then please don't apply the soil fertilizers or things like that, because the rain will take this away. This is something that is improving the cost of food. And these are things that I think that the world needs. And it is using the technology that we are calling enabling of IoT. I would put in a little bit different what you are saying. The applications that I see, that I mentioned, are the applications that will help people. This is one movie that IoTA made that she said, and that I intend to show tomorrow. They only show applications of for the people in their lives, not like a gadget.
Okay, we've just about run out of time. Now, when we started, and the people I'm just going to mention weren't here then, John said, you can't sit at the back because I'm going to pick on you. So I noticed we have 2 ladies sitting right at the back, Puan Mastura and Puan Aziza, 2 very formidable ladies. Now, Puan Mastura very much represents the industry here, the private sector, and insofar as anybody can be said to represent the government, Puan Aziza represents, for our purposes at least, the government.
You're making me the bad guy.
No. I'm just about to make you the bad guy. In 1 or 2 sentences each, please will you tell those 2 ladies what's the single most imperative thing that is going to help us achieve the promise and avoid the myth of IoT in this country?
It's not different from what I said in the start of this debate. For me, the imperative for IoT, first of all, is education. Education in the sense that's not just to teach people to read and write, but to teach people to think about their lives and to be aware of their condition. And with this, they can identify their needs. if we have this good identification of the needs, this is the raw material both for the government and both for the private sector. Because when the needs are identified, it helps the government to define the priorities of the public investment. And this guide also the investment may guide of the industry to provide the solutions. So I insist that education is very important, and then the dissemination in the sense of what can we provide, what is available, what can be done.
Thank you. Gabriel?
I think that I follow this, the education, together with this responsibility to help to establish some standards, some needs for interoperability in such a way that the investors, the companies that will do investment could feel a little bit more comfortable that they will not be taken away by some change. And the technology will be changing, but at least that to have some standards in terms of what should be done.
John?
So I'm going to build on both the standards and the education. I would say, in addition to those, I want skilled, passionate testers in the case of this audience that want to really see improvement in the world and societies and countries. And that's building.
Okay. So, we have 2 sentences, maybe with comma in between. Okay, to Aziza, I'd say, well, the government is in a role to enforce open interfaces and open standards in any procurement that you're going to have, and that also please support the IoT development by while supporting open data. I only have 1 sentence, so that's why I do not further explain. And to Mastura, I say it's important to assure that those open interfaces and open standards work. So we do need test processes, test devices, people that are able to ensure interoperability, performance, security by certifying processes, people, and products in IoT.
That's one of the longest sentences today, I think, but thank you. So, any comments from the back there, or?
Mike, thank you very much for raising that concern, and for us, I think we are here to listen and to learn about the applications of IoT, as we had the discussions last night. Yeah, I think the path that we're going is also we'll be discussing after this the education, the capacity building, identification of needs. This is something we have to also look at, because I think we're not looking at technology per se, but more of what problems IoT can solve. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mastura, any comment?
Okay, I was a bit proactive. I talked to Francois. We did talk about the standards of IoT, the interfaces and what Ina was saying just now. And this is something we were actually proposing in the next SA meeting in May.
Excellent. There we go. So all it remains for me to do is to, first of all, thank our panel, Jose, Gabriel, John, Ina. Thank you for very interesting answers and questions and talks. But we've had a few questions. Oh, one more question.
In terms of the part where education of IoT, now, usually, which body of knowledge is usually being referred to in terms of delivering this, the standard knowledge of IoT for younger generation? Because currently, if we want to offer IoT courses inside a university, where can we refer to?
Come to my session tomorrow.
Other than that,
No? Well, there you go. That's the answer. Come tomorrow and you'll find out. So on that, I will thank everybody here who's asked questions, everybody here who's listened, but actually everybody who came. Thank you very much. I hope it was worthwhile. And a big hand for our panel.